Good morning. So we're going to talk about how good school food can change everything. So I'll start off with some introductions here. So we have John Dillon. John Dillon is a public policy researcher and consultant with the Center for Mississippi Health Policy in Jackson, Mississippi, and works to promote equitable, evidence-based solutions to the impacts of public policy on population health. We have Hernan. Hernan is the founder of the Institute for Ecology, Scholarship, and Health, which helps organizations design creative solutions to achieve their sustainability goals. And we have Hallie. Hallie is the value chain director at the Sustainable Food Center right here in Austin, where she and her team build local school purchasing power and work to shift policy to nourish our health, land, and livelihood. And I am Sunny Baker. I work to lead school food reform and envision a new culture of regional-based eating. I am currently serving as the interim senior director of programs and policy at the National Farm to School Network, and I am a co-conspirator in liberation and justice work that centers community. I'm based out of Quapaw and Osage lands, now known as Little Rock, Arkansas. So I am going to do a rapid-fire history of the school food program in this country. So people have always fed children in schools. It started with volunteers since the start of schools in our country. And then during the Great Depression, when resources were short and those volunteers were finding really hungry kids in schools, policy was introduced to make National School Lunch Program a federal program. And that was in 1946 under President Truman. And it's important to note that Truman thought of this policy as a measure of national security to safeguard the health and well-being of the nation's children and to encourage domestic consumption of nutritious agricultural commodities. So school nutrition in this country has always been incredibly closely tied to agriculture and food production in this country. In fact, still today, there's a commodities line for schools that every school is getting a certain number of commodities based on the number of students that they feed. I want to take a moment, too, to recognize the importance of the Black Panther Party in school meal programs in the country. The Black Panther Party started the school breakfast program as one of their social services outreach. That was in 1969, and it was meant to help fuel revolution by encouraging Black people's survival. And this program was incredibly beneficial for the students that participated. They noted an immediate difference in the performance of students, the behavior of students, and the health. There were less stomach pains. Kids were able to stay awake during the school day. It was always meant that school food would be more than nourishment for our kids. It's a time for learning. A child should not go to school and learn in the first half of the day, in the second half of the day, and not also learn when they're eating in a school cafeteria. And early on, in the original intent of the National School Lunch Program, was not necessarily to feed, but to teach cultural norms about American ways of eating in our country, which is something we can think about as we move forward with school food, and what are we teaching in those cafeterias. So today, the National School Lunch Program is in over 100,000 schools across the country. That's 5 billion meals annually and 31 million meals every day. The nutrition content of those meals is dictated by the USDA, but it's important to note that the only food that is required on a tray every day is produce, either a fruit or a vegetable. After labor and admin expenses, and by the way, school food staff are often the lowest paid staff members at an entire school district, less than janitors often, although janitors deserve fair pay and as well. After all those admin costs, we see about $1.25 for food on every tray. Incredibly low. And yet, we have seen school districts across the country doing incredible things, and we're going to get to learn more about the Austin School District right here in a minute. We've seen scratch cooking in these cafeterias, local purchasing, farm to school, school gardens, and sometimes even that school garden food makes it into the cafeteria, which is incredible. We've seen culturally relevant meals. Montana has created recently an entire menu database on how to integrate native foods into school meals. In Sitka, Alaska, they have a Fish to Schools program. Boulder Valley School District is doing organic bulk milk for their students. There are these examples from across the country. This can be done, but it is not the norm. In order to have school food in the way I'm describing, we need every child eating in the cafeteria. As it stands currently, we divide students into categories: kids that get a free meal from school, a reduced cost meal from school, and children with the ability to pay. It is our responsibility to participate in school meal programs. It's our responsibility now to send our kids so that it's not just the free kids that are eating in the cafeterias, but it's our responsibility as a country to implement something called universal school meals, which means that every kid gets a meal from school. And we really thought this was going to happen. During the pandemic, we instituted legislation so that there were universal school meals. We saw the importance of schools as community hubs and places that were feeding children during the pandemic, not just as like a fun thing that happens during the day, but as a way to keep our children alive. Sometimes a school meal is the only food a child is going to get in the day. So when that pandemic legislation around universal meals happened, us in the school food reform world thought, surely this will never go away. We're going to see the benefit of this. It's going to be so great. This thing we've been fighting for so long will be here. And yet, in September, it did. And we are right back to the way that things were, where we're dividing kids up into categories. So a number of states have stepped up to the plate and have introduced universal school meal policies: Colorado, Maine, California, and some of those states are integrating their values into those universal school meal campaigns. In New Mexico, they wrote purchasing local foods into their universal school meal policy. We demand school meals for all children. We demand that these meals line up with values around economic justice, environmental justice, health impact, animal welfare, respecting workers and educators, and prioritizing racial equity. Our country has a lot of repairing to do when it comes to the food system in this country. Our children deserve the best because they are inherently valuable. Our children deserve delicious, nourishing school meals that feature foods that represent their people, and with local foods sourced right from their community, benefiting their local economy. Our children deserve this dignity. Our current food system and our current school meal program is functioning exactly the way it was designed, to benefit exactly the people it was designed to benefit. To get large-scale, mostly white male landowners the funds that they need, to get a bare minimum of calories and nutrients on school trays, nutrition requirements that have been largely influenced by big-scale food industry. It's not only the right thing to do to have values-aligned universal school meals, but it is the way, it is the route to creating a better food system that is better for our bodies, for our health, for our communities, for our farmers, for climate, and for knowing one another and one another's cultures through food. This event is the future of food, and this is the future I can envision for school food. So I'm going to turn it over to my panelists here and ask a couple of questions, and we'll start with Hernan. Hernan's right here in Texas, so what are some of the challenges and innovations that you've seen on the ground here in Texas? Can you paint us a picture?
Yeah, Sunny, thank you so much. And thank you for highlighting all of those historical tidbits that a lot of people don't actually realize have gone into CNP programs. So thank you for that. School food programs are incredibly difficult because we're having to work within, so I was a CNP director for a number of years, and we're having to work within incredible amount of red tape. All of the finances are highly regulated. It's not a free-for-all with these public funds, right? They're incredibly regulated. And so anytime a meal is served, it has to qualify as a reimbursable meal if we're going to get into the technicality, right? And so there's a lot of different definitions for how that is interpreted in various states. But here in Texas, they're very strict, and we need certain meal components in that. So that makes it incredibly challenging when we're working with a few dollars, a couple of dollars for breakfast actually, and a few, just double that for lunch. So that's incredibly difficult. And to add to that, the districts who have the greater buying power end up going to the sources who are most, who are cheaper, right? Most cost effective. But that isn't always what is best for our students, as I'm sure some of you all know. So we're in this highly regulated environment with very little margins to play with, and they're nonprofit food service programs, right? So they can't actually be making a profit off of this. So all of that makes it incredibly difficult for anybody who's trying to change anything with the supply chain, with the actual menu patterns, which are also incredibly regulated. There's nutritional requirements that go into that, which are, to a certain extent, is good, right? We can't just serve anything to our students, but it's incredibly flawed, that whole system as well, as Sunny alluded to. All of these challenges, yet I am always inspired to see C&P directors across the region where I work, here in Texas, in the United States, folks that I interact with, getting very creative with the small amount of funding that they have available, with with their labor, with their passion. All of this can lead to just really breakthrough efforts. So I want to highlight some. There has been some school farm programs that I've worked closely with. And instead of having to go through all of the logistical and financial red tape that they found in trying to procure from their local farmers that also wanted to sell to them, a school district started their own farm. And that has become an exemplar model for other neighboring school districts. And so they're able to avoid some of that red tape because they're growing their own food. And so they know what needs to go into that food. They know how to grow it, food safety requirements that are in that. And the students benefit ultimately because while the district is saving money on their produce, the students are eating the produce that was harvested that same day oftentimes. And oftentimes they're harvesting it, they're doing the growing, they're preparing it, fertilizing, preparing the soil, all of these things, and delivering to the cafeteria. So it's really impressive work that I've seen, and that idea is starting to grow, right? That farm-to-school model is also a variation of that, rather, is gaining steam from a different direction. So one of the things that makes it difficult to buy from local producers is that school districts often need to go with the lowest source, the lowest cost product, right? So if you have lettuce coming in from California with these 3,000-acre farms, they have the economies of scale on their side when compared to a 5-acre lettuce grower nearby down the street from the school district. And so when a school district goes out for what we call formal procurement, they have to go with the cheaper option. Now there's some opportunities there as well. There's the geographic preference that can definitely be leveraged a little bit more, but oftentimes school districts will go with the cheaper option also because they have less money to play with, right? So so here in Texas, we have what are called education service centers, and those serve as a middleman, so to speak, between the Texas Department of Agriculture, which sets the regulations for C&P programs, and school districts. They serve as a middleman. And in one innovative education service center, they are now going to manage one contract so that all school districts can buy from using that one contract from local growers. And so that is easy for growers to sell to, because it's just one contract that they have to deal with, and not multiple school districts, multiple schools. It's just one contract. School districts, on the other hand, are also benefiting because they're buying using one contract. And so all of that formal procurement, all of that paperwork that accompanies every single meal with every single student is severely reduced, which is a good thing. And those kind of innovative processes are extremely helpful because they're serving as a model for other school districts that happen to want to partner, or other states that may have something similar, like education service centers here in Texas. They're able to accomplish local production, and with an emphasis on agroecological production, they'll award more points to that, or they'll include in their formal procurement stipulations. We are looking for this type of product, organic, GAP certified, et cetera, right? They can put in what they want. They're getting very innovative. So that's what I've seen so far.
Yeah, I think that model generally is really exciting to see because it really emphasizes the power of cooperative economics and these institutions working together. I think what you shared underscores the point that this can't be school by school. It's about working together and creating policy change, to your point, Sunny, and also creating this collective change using this purchasing cooperative model or other cooperative marketing models. I think it's so key.
Yeah, thank you. And also, around that geographic preference and having to go with the lowest bid, we did just see, it's super exciting, the USDA has put out a durable rule before we get our next child nutrition reauthorization, that would allow for geographic preference for everyone, so you wouldn't have to go with the lowest bid. So perhaps, while I have this audience, we could all go to the USDA's website where they are taking comments right now and say, yes, please, to that geographic preference option for the durable rule.
And that's with the upcoming Farm Bill. That's where these decisions are getting made.
So this is a separate, so this is while we are waiting for child nutrition reauthorization to happen, which who knows when that will be. And that's what regulates school food in this country. They have what's called a durable rule, which will take the place of that legislation in the meantime. But they put some cool stuff in there. And it was great. And it's stuff we've been fighting for, like geographic preference. There's also a rule that would allow indigenous communities to count things like, what was it? For grain, sometimes indigenous communities are using root crops and root vegetables, so it would allow them to count those for that grain requirement, which is really exciting. All right, so Hallie and Dillon, this question is for both of you. What could this look like if we invest in policy change? What is the opportunity on the table, economic, health, environmental?
Yeah, when we talk about the economic possibility, there's a lot of money on the table, right? And you alluded to this already, and you talked about this some, but some schools are operating their own kitchens, but some schools are contracting out to companies that actually run their child nutrition programs. And nationally, there are 3 what they're called food service management companies that control about 45% of the national market, and that's $33 billion that those 3 companies are receiving. On the supply side, there are 2 what's called broadline distributors, so companies who basically will supply schools at the lowest possible cost, and they control about 75% of the institutional feeding market from the supply side, and that itself is $65 billion. So there's a lot of money on the table, and these companies can be immense allies, right, in changing the way that our students are fed. And the way that our money gets spent on the food that we're sending into institutions. But right now, largely it's business as usual, and so they're purchasing from these large industrial farms. And what we've seen is that not only are these industrial farms worse for the environment, as you alluded to, but they're also just not good for our rural communities. So we're talking a lot about our school communities, but these industrial farms increase income inequality in our rural communities. They increase unemployment in our rural communities compared to smaller farms, decrease property values, increase community stress, and decrease civic engagement. So there's a cascade of the challenges that these industrial farms really introduce into our rural communities. Not to mention Our smaller and mid-sized farmers are really prioritizing labor. They're creating jobs. They're supporting agroecological methods largely, and protecting animal welfare. When we think about local purchasing and purchasing from small and mid-sized farmers, that what we call like agricultural middle, as opposed to hyper small or hyper large farms, it's what we call a multiplication effect of 1.72. So if you think of $100 that a school could spend on a local product, then we have an additional $72 that's entering our local economies. So that's $72 in job wages, that's $72 in goods and services being purchased. It includes things like insurance, or land purchasing, or investing in infrastructure on farm, or cold trucks, buying from other local businesses and supporting other local employees, creating these jobs. And so when we think about creating better food systems within our schools, it's not just about, supporting local, but it's about how spending those dollars within the local food economy support our commonly held values, support our value to, have the most nutritious food available, support our value to protect the animals that, are being fed to our students, to support a valued workforce, environmental sustainability. And so when we think about how these dollars are being spent, we're not prioritizing those values, and we need to be. And there's just a huge economic opportunity to increase that multiplication effect of how our public dollars are being spent and really turn that into like a public good, so that we really are creating better rural economies. We're supporting these commonly held values of environmental sustainability, of protecting our labor. And it's not just about these values, it's also about equity. To your point earlier, the power of having better school meals also means that we have more students that will be eating, because they'll be more appetizing, frankly. They'll be more excited to eat in the cafeteria. And the more meals that are eaten in the cafeteria, the better the food can actually be, right? We don't often think about this, but cafeterias are an earned revenue model. And so we have meals that are out for reimbursement, but we also have students that pay in the cafeteria. And a couple of years ago, here in Austin ISD, there's been a lot of incredible work that AISD nutrition team has been doing to really transform their purchasing and really create options for better procurement and more localized procurement. But the child nutrition director at Austin ISD, I think 2 years ago, or maybe it was pre-pandemic, so it must have been 2019, ran some numbers and discovered that if every student in the district ate one meal in the cafeteria per week, that I see you laughing. We have someone from AISD Nutrition here today. Shout out to you for doing the amazing work. But if every student in AISD ate in the cafeteria once a week, that the district could afford grass-fed beef for everyone in the district, for everyone. And if they ate in the cafeteria twice a week, they could afford organic produce. And if they ate in the district 3 times a week, they could afford organic milk. So it's about, really harnessing these public dollars and the ways that we're feeding our students and being able to open that up to really center our collective values. But I'll hand it over to John Dillon to expand on that a little more.
Yeah, and so it's really important to consider, too, like you said, how we're spending those dollars and what types of food and what types of producers we're supporting, but then also just for long-term effects with the children, with the current foods that are being offered or are the easiest to get, those are directly contributing to like childhood onset of type 2 diabetes, which used to be referred to as adult onset diabetes after years of high intakes of sugar in your diet and being sedentary. But now the average for children that are under 18, if they're diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, it's around age 14. And so that just sets them up for a long time, like a lot of health complications over their life. But if we use this money wisely, we can get good food on the table that steers away from those types of diseases in children, and it just sets up better health behaviors for them to understand just like, oh, this is good for me because, it tastes good and it's cool, but also through, like you said, with the farms on the school properties, that gives them the opportunity to not only see that as a workforce opportunity, but just to understand the science and everything behind it. So diet-related diseases cost Americans about $850 billion a year through healthcare spending or lost economic output. And so when you think about, the types of foods that are being subsidized through the Farm Bill and how the CNR has not been reauthorized since 2015, I think. Yeah. We really just need to put our money where our mouth is, I guess, when it comes to federal spending on foods for children.
If I can add to John Dillon's comments. So I completely agree, because when we're more intentional about our dollars, like you're saying, Hallie, we really, knock out multiple birds with one stone, right? We're serving our environment well. We're improving it. We're reducing biodiversity loss, et cetera, right? Just the list goes on and on. Students benefit not only physically or physiologically, but also mentally. I've done a lot of work looking at socio-emotional health with children, particularly with their interactions with farm programs, school gardens, and eating organic foods in the classroom. And we saw multiple improvements. And so mentally, particularly after being cooped up over 2 years with a global pandemic, needing to reverse that damage, so to speak, right? And that goes for all of us, not just children. Eating better does improve our mental health as well. And there's a lot of science coming out around the connection to our gut health and our mood, emotional well-being, etc. And so relatively new science, relatively speaking, but there's so much that we can accomplish by just being much more intentional with our dollars. And not to mention all of the social equity, social good, social benefits that we would derive from that. It's just, there's no reason not to do this. I have yet to find someone who can argue against this.
Yeah, and you brought up social equity, and we're all here at the Future of Food, so I feel like we're all kind of bought into the idea of supporting better food in general. But when we think about the power of institutions in particular, it is about social equity, because our institutions, whether that's schools or universities or hospitals or the carceral system, we have billions of dollars that are going through these institutions, and they're feeding everyone, right? When we talk about bringing new and exciting foods to market, that's fantastic, but often those better foods are going into grocery stores or going into restaurants, and that's a limited, income-limited market. And so when we're looking at institutions, it really is about an equitable access to these good foods.
Yeah, and on that, and to your point of a lot of making up to do for it, I read somewhere recently that it's even if every American could afford to eat the recommended fruits and vegetables a day and wanted to, there wouldn't be enough to go around. So as far as commodities and things that are subsidized and how some of those programs seem to work against each other, that's a really good opportunity to just kind of figure out where follow the money and get the bang for your buck, I guess.
Yeah, this feels like a great opportunity for me to paint this picture about where our tax dollars are going in terms of the food system in this country. So the Farm Bill is the largest piece of legislation that controls food in this country. And y'all,
This is the second largest check that the government writes after defense. So we spend a lot of money on food.
$29.6 billion go towards commodity agriculture in the Farm Bill. So that's cotton, corn, soy, stuff we don't eat unless it ends up in our gummy bears in the form of high fructose corn syrup.
Or feed for livestock that contribute to carbon emissions.
Or in our cows. Yes, exactly. $29.6 billion checks to large-scale landowners. When you drive through the beautiful country and you see those farms and you envision farm life, it is monocrop agriculture. It is the same thing out there. and it is not what we're eating. $4.2 billion. So a tiny incy little 1% of the farm bill is what's going towards what is even called specialty crops, fruits and vegetables in this country, often in the form of really competitive grant programs. And yet, us in the food system, every time the farm bill is up for renewal, we're like fighting for pieces of that tiny 1%. And we don't even go after the commodity line because of the power of the commodity industry in this country. So if we want to talk about our values in terms of food system work and how we can get better food into schools, but better food for people, we need to talk about where our taxpayer dollars are going and where our values stand.
Yeah, and that brings us back to what you brought up at the very beginning, which was like the school food program was created by the Department of Defense as an economic development program. And it was like a happy side benefit that it also fed our children. And now we're really seeing that it's reinforcing these really negative for the environment, negative for our rural communities, negative for our school children, for us, industrial farms, this industrial agricultural complex. And like you're saying, this is our tax dollars, and it should reflect our values and how we want our children to be eating.
And to speak to that a little bit about the Department of Defense and how it was their program, that's the number one reason that people are turned away from registering to serve in the U.S. Armed Forces is obesity or diet-related diseases. So,
as I heard them put it once, children that are too fat to fight.
Oh.
And in the 90s, the Department of Defense invested in the fresh fruit and vegetable program in every state in the country. And that is one way that we are getting local foods into schools. We were talking about that this morning. And it's a great opportunity. Department of Defense is purchasing lots of food in every state in this country. So that food should be going towards small-scale growers in our country.
Yeah, and to add to that, I'd hate to be all doom and gloom up here because we are looking forward, and we got to find the opportunities embedded. And so you talked about Department of Defense. They're still a critical component of school nutrition programs, and they're part of what schools can get for free, so to speak. I mean, there's never a free meal, but school districts won't have to pay for that product that comes through the DoD. Nevertheless, that has its own issues with how DoD procures products for that supply chain. But the USDA is actually committing more dollars to helping school districts procure more local foods in an environmentally conscious way. And so there is change happening. We have to seize this moment, nevertheless, because if we don't take advantage of this opportunity, the next administration may not see the demand and ultimately do away with it. And I will also add, Texas is also, they're on paper at least, I have yet to know whether it's, how committed the state of Texas is, but on paper, they at least do commit to supporting local foods. And so we need to make sure that we are making our voices heard by those of us who can influence that, either by our voices or our actions. Make sure that we're heard through increasing local procurement in schools, our institutions. We keep talking about schools, but this actually applies to hospitals, private hospitals, for-profit, other nonprofit entities that feed people en masse. So it really is a similar ball game across institutions.
No, I was just going to say that brings us back to the Farm Bill, your point, that Sunny brought up at the beginning. And this is an omnibus bill that comes up once every 5 years. And this is the first time we're addressing our food issues as a nation post-COVID, right, where we really saw, to your point at the beginning, schools as critical infrastructure, schools as food access infrastructure. And I know this is South by, so we have a lot of out-of-towners, but for the Texans in the room, we have several Texas representatives on the House Agriculture Committee. And so they are going to be the ones who are steering the Farm Bill. And I really encourage folks to Think about values-aligned universal meals. Think about, the ways that we're shifting the taxpayer dollars that are spent in this huge omnibus bill to support what we see as the future of food.
John Dillon, what did you tell me this morning about the Farm Bill? It's the first Farm Bill that will hit $1 trillion.
Yeah, it's the first one that's going to go over $1 trillion. So it's getting more expensive, every time it goes through Congress. But yet the health equity divide just keeps getting greater and greater, and access to food is just always teetering for everyone. And so I think that, especially with a bill that expensive, it's really key, like she said, these stakeholders to make sure that their voices are heard to the people that can actually steer that money.
Yeah, I just like to think of it, that's our money. That's our money that we're putting in. And I should mention that most of the Farm Bill is for SNAP, the food stamp program in this country. That's the vast majority of the Farm Bill, and that need continues to grow every time we introduce a Farm Bill. So it seems like maybe the system is not designed to help those people so that we can decrease that number. I would love to see what we could do with those billions of dollars reinvested for fresh fruits and vegetables, for small-scale black farmers in Mississippi, for new farmers, for immigrant farmers across the country who are largely growing the food that we eat in this country. We talk about how farm labor, we have such a huge problem with farm labor in this country, and we have to bring labor in, and we can't pay fair wages, and it's like, well, we could. It's not as if there's not an opportunity to basically move money around to make this happen.
Yeah, like corn is cheap because the government subsidizes it year after year after year. So since that's not healthy for us, since half of it goes to animal feed, maybe steer some of that the money in the direction of the farm and agriculture workforce,
As well as the auxiliary services, right? So we need coal trucks, we need roads, we need cold rooms, all of the infrastructure in place to get these products from farm to our table, because a lot of the infrastructure for small growers or agroecological growers, et cetera, it's not there. So we also need to consider all of those things as well.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful picture that we could paint, and I think we should end on a happy note here, because this is a room of supporters and an audience of supporters, and just to be aware that this is happening is important. To be aware as you potentially are interacting with your legislators, as you're talking with other parents at school, and wondering what happened to those free school meals that were so wonderful, often at many school districts, and then maybe not looking so great at some. But this is a future that we can see, and like your point, Hernan, there are places that we need to invest in order to make this happen. I'm thinking especially about the Good Acre in Minneapolis, this incredible place that helps distribute locally grown foods to schools, but also provide that culinary training to the food service staff so that they know what to do when those foods show up in the cafeteria. So I think we'll end with what's on your tray in terms of like a beautiful school meal for the future. Anyone can start.
For me, what's on a school tray.
Like the food. What food would you like to see on a beautiful school meal?
Oh gosh, I don't know.
I know.
I know you know.
I know.
Yeah.
I love food. So I would have tacos, but the tortillas would be corn, and it would be corn grown, from somebody I knew. Probably a mixture of colors too, because that's heirloom corn that was grown by Aztecs, Mayans, Native Americans here in what is now the United States. And the filling, it would just be anything, but probably huitlacoche. It's delicious. That's what I would have.
Love it. Hallie, what you got?
Some folks might not know this, but Central Texas, as an extension of the Great Plains, is actually like historically bison country. So mine would definitely include bison, which is one of our biggest native foods in Texas. Bison with some wild rice, maybe some collards. I feel like that's what would be on my dream plate.
I love it.
Okay.
What you got,
okra,
John Dillon?
Some greens.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And John Dillon and I was in Mississippi for the last 10 years, so my tray would definitely look very Mississippi. I would do some purple hull peas,
Definitely.
some catfish,
Yeah.
locally raised.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
Belzona, Mississippi, the catfish capital of the world.
That's right. Maybe some sweet potatoes of different colors, too.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I can